45 days. That's exactly how long I pretended I didn't know my husband was sleeping with my best friend. 45 days of smiling at him every morning, making coffee like always, asking about his work while knowing exactly where he'd been the night before. And today, when Matthew finally had the courage to ask for a divorce in our kitchen, I just smiled and said, "Of course, honey." What he didn't know was that I had spent every single one of those 45 days meticulously preparing for this exact moment. My name is Mila Thompson, and at 34, I'm a senior digital marketing manager at one of Seattle's largest tech companies. For 10 years of marriage, I dedicated my life to Matthew Hall, believing we had built something solid, something real. Penelope Lee, my best friend of 8 years, was practically family. She had dinner with us every Friday, spent holidays at our house, knew every detail of our lives. But standing here now, watching Matthew pack his things into boxes, I realized that the last 45 days have been the most revealing of my adult life. The discovery happened in such a mundane way, it's almost comical. It was a Thursday morning. I was getting ready for an important work meeting when Matthew rushed out to grab something from the car. He had left his iPhone unlocked on the kitchen counter. I was just going to put it on the charger when the screen lit up with a text notification. The name on the screen was Pen, with a heart emoji. Penelope, obviously. But what made me stop completely was the message preview that appeared. "Can't wait to feel you again tonight. Yesterday was incredible." For a moment, I was literally paralyzed. My first reaction was to think I was misinterpreting, that there was some innocent explanation. But when I picked up the phone and opened the conversation, what I found was months of intimate messages between my husband and my best friend. Messages detailing motel meetings, sexual fantasies, even conversations about how I was too naive to notice what was happening right under my nose. The betrayal itself was devastating, but the way they talked about me in those messages, that's what really ignited something in my chest. Matthew writing things like, "Mila's so focused on work she doesn't even notice when I leave." And Penelope responding, "It's better that way, she was never smart enough anyway." They weren't just betraying me, they were completely underestimating me. In that moment, standing in my own kitchen, reading messages that destroyed everything I believed in, a single question echoed in my mind. How far would they go? How far would Matthew take this charade? How far would Penelope continue pretending to be my friend while sleeping with my husband? And more importantly, what would I do with this information? When Matthew came back from the car, I had already placed the phone exactly where he'd left it. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I asked with a natural smile. "Yes, thanks, babe," he replied, grabbing the phone without even suspecting that I had just discovered the biggest secret of our married life. In that moment, I made a decision that would change everything. I wouldn't confront anything yet. I would observe, document, and discover exactly who these people I thought I knew really were. What they didn't know was that the last few years working in digital marketing had taught me some valuable things about investigation, documentation, and strategy. If Matthew and Penelope wanted to underestimate me, I would let them make that mistake. For 45 complete days. During those 45 days, I became a perfect actress. Every morning, I woke up and played the role of the naive wife and trusting best friend. When Penelope came for dinner on Fridays, I hugged her warmly and asked about her love life, watching how she averted her eyes. When Matthew came home late with excuses about work meetings, I just nodded and asked if he wanted me to heat up dinner. But what neither of them realized was that every lie, every secret meeting, every moment of fake intimacy was being meticulously documented. Every time Matthew worked late, I discreetly checked the GPS records from our shared car. Every time Penelope canceled our plans last minute, I noted the date and time. Every message that appeared on his phone while he showered was quickly photographed. I became a detective of my own life, and what I discovered over those 45 days was much worse than I initially imagined. It wasn't just a physical affair, they were planning a future together. In the most recent messages, they discussed when Matthew would finally have the courage to ask for divorce, and how they would divide the properties. Penelope had even started looking for apartments for her and Matthew to live together. The irony of all this is that while they considered me too naive to notice the betrayal, I was 3 steps ahead of both of them. While they secretly planned our divorce, I had already consulted Seattle's best family attorney and was preparing a legal strategy that would leave them completely unprepared. That's when I realized something that sent chills down my spine. This wasn't just about catching them in the act. This was about discovering exactly how far they would go to manipulate and deceive me. This was about seeing if there were any limits to their betrayal, any lines they wouldn't cross. And what I found over the next 45 days was that some people have absolutely no limits at all. But here's what Matthew and Penelope never could have anticipated. I don't just manage digital marketing campaigns for a living. I specialize in data analysis, behavioral tracking, and strategic planning. For the last 5 years, I've been solving complex problems for million-dollar clients by gathering information, identifying patterns, and executing perfectly timed campaigns. And now, for the first time in my life, I was about to use every single one of those skills for something personal. What they were about to discover was that the naive little wife they thought they knew so well had just become their worst nightmare. Let me take you back to the beginning and explain exactly how I got here, because the complete story is even more revealing than you might imagine. Matthew and I met 12 years ago at the University of Washington. I was in my senior year of marketing, and he was studying business administration. At the time, Matthew was charming in an unpretentious way, not the arrogant, careless man he would become years later. We got married 2 years after graduation in a small but perfect ceremony at the Seattle Botanical Garden. I truly believed we had something special. Penelope entered our lives 3 years after the wedding. I met her at the gym where I was trying to maintain some balance between my rising career and personal life. Penelope was a personal trainer there, a confident and outgoing woman who immediately offered to help me with an exercise program. Within weeks, we became close friends. Within months, she was practically part of the family. What initially attracted me to Penelope was her contagious energy and apparent loyalty. She was the type of person who defended you when you weren't around, who remembered your birthday before even your family did, who showed up at your door with ice cream when you were having a bad day. For 8 years, she was my confidant for everything: work problems, marriage insecurities, dreams for the future. I trusted her more than anyone else in my life. Matthew was always more reserved about friendships, so when he started opening up to Penelope, I was genuinely happy. Finally, he had someone besides me to talk to, someone who could help us have a more active social life. When the 3 of us went out together, we seemed like the perfect trio. Penelope often joked that she was the third wheel of our relationship, and we laughed about it like it was an innocent joke. The first signs that something was changing started about 6 months ago. Matthew, who had always been a present husband, began working overtime with increasing frequency. As a sales manager at a dealership, this wasn't completely unusual, but the frequency started bothering me. Around the same time, Penelope began canceling our regular meetups more often. New client, gym emergency, not feeling well, there was always a plausible excuse. What really should have alerted me were the subtle changes in both their behavior when we were together. Matthew started checking his phone constantly, something he had never done before. Penelope, who had always been tactile with me, hugs, arm touches during conversations, became physically distant. When the 3 of us were together, there was a strange tension in the air, like they shared inside jokes I didn't understand. But I rationalized everything. Matthew was under pressure at work. Penelope was expanding her client base. I was so focused on my own career, having just been promoted to senior manager, that I attributed these changes to general adult life stress. How ironic to discover later that they used exactly my work dedication as justification for the betrayal. The morning of discovery 45 days ago started like any other Thursday. I had an important presentation for a new client, an e-commerce company that could represent a $500,000 contract for our agency. Matthew had left early for a supplier meeting. I later discovered it was to meet Penelope at their usual motel before work. When the notification appeared on his iPhone, my first reaction was genuinely innocent. Penelope occasionally texted Matthew about group plans or to ask about birthday gifts for me. Seeing her name on the screen wasn't unusual, but something about the tone of the message, even in the preview, made me pause. "Can't wait to feel you again tonight. Yesterday was incredible." For a moment, my brain simply refused to process what my eyes were seeing. It was like the words were in a foreign language. I reread the message 3 times before the meaning actually penetrated. Even then, my rational mind tried to find alternative explanations. Maybe it was a message sent to the wrong person. Maybe it was some kind of inside joke I didn't understand. But when I opened the complete conversation, there was no more room for denial. Months of messages stretched across the screen. Intimate conversations, suggestive photos, detailed planning of secret meetings. I read every message with a mixture of shock, disgust, and a cold anger growing in my chest. It wasn't just the evidence of physical betrayal that devastated me. It was the cruel comments about me, about our marriage, about how I was obsessed with work and emotionally distant. One conversation in particular cut deeper than all the others. It was from 2 weeks earlier, after a night when Matthew had come home at 11:30 p.m. with his breath smelling like perfume different from mine. Matthew had written, "She didn't even ask where I was. Just said, 'Hi, honey,' and went back to her laptop." Penelope responded, "Typical Mila. Work was always more important than you two." Matthew, "Sometimes I wonder if she'd notice if I disappeared for a whole week." Penelope, "Honestly? Probably not. She lives in her own world." Matthew, "That's why you're so different. You actually see me." Penelope, "And you see me too. When are we going to stop pretending and make this real?" Reading those words was like receiving a punch to the stomach. Not only were they betraying me, they were painting me as the villain of the story, as if my work dedication justified destroying our marriage and our 8-year friendship. But it was in that moment of absolute betrayal and humiliation that something unexpected happened. Instead of collapsing, instead of immediately confronting them with tears and accusations, a calculating coldness took over me. Maybe it was years of experience solving marketing crises for corporate clients, or maybe it was a part of me I had never accessed before, but my mind immediately shifted to strategic mode. If Matthew and Penelope wanted to underestimate me, if they really believed I was so naive and work-obsessed that I wouldn't notice a betrayal right under my nose, then I would let them continue believing that. While they felt secure in their arrogance, I would have time to plan my response meticulously and devastatingly. I quickly photographed the most incriminating messages with my own phone, deleted the history showing I had accessed the conversation, and placed Matthew's iPhone exactly where he had left it. When he returned from the car 5 minutes later, I was calmly preparing my breakfast, as if nothing had happened. "Did you find what you were looking for?" I asked naturally. "Yes, thanks, babe. You look beautiful today," he replied, giving me a quick kiss on the forehead before grabbing his phone. In that moment, watching my husband of 10 years kiss me after spending the night with my best friend, after reading how they ridiculed our life together, a single certainty crystallized in my mind. I would discover exactly how far this betrayal went, document every lie, every meeting, every moment of disrespect. And when it came time to confront them, I would be so prepared that they would never recover from the shock. What Matthew didn't know, when he gave me that condescending kiss, was that he had just awakened a side of me that even I didn't know existed. A side that was meticulous, patient, and absolutely relentless. The next 45 days became the most intensive masterclass of my life in investigation, acting, and strategic planning. If Matthew and Penelope wanted to play games with me, I would play back, but with rules they couldn't even imagine existed. The first thing I did was establish a completely imperceptible documentation system. I created a separate Gmail account, accessible only from my work laptop, where I would catalog all evidence. Every lie from Matthew was recorded with date, time, and circumstances. Every sudden cancellation from Penelope was documented. Every work meeting that didn't coincide with the dealership's business hours was carefully noted. But documenting wasn't enough. I needed concrete evidence, and that's where my experience in digital marketing became invaluable. Years of creating tracking campaigns had taught me some things about monitoring and data collection that Matthew and Penelope could never imagine. The first discovery came when I checked our shared cell phone plan online. Matthew had been sending an average of 200 messages per day to Penelope's number, an increase from practically 0 to 200 in just 4 months. Even more revealing, the timing patterns. Activity spikes always happened between 10 p.m. and midnight, exactly when he was working late, and again between 6 and 7 a.m., before I woke up. But the most damning evidence came from our shared car. Matthew usually drove my Honda Civic when his Toyota was in the shop, which happened frequently due to the vehicle's age. What he didn't know was that I had added a GPS tracking plan to my car 2 years earlier, after it had been stolen and recovered. The feature had remained active since then, recording every trip in detail. The GPS records from the last 2 months told a crystal-clear story. While Matthew told me he was working late at the dealership, the car was frequently parked at the Riverside Motel, a 2-star establishment on the outskirts of Seattle. Even more interesting, on days when Penelope canceled our plans due to gym emergencies, the GPS showed the car arriving at the motel exactly when our activities were supposed to begin. Armed with this information, I began the third phase of my investigation: visual confirmation. This required perfect timing and a considerable amount of risk, but I needed photographic evidence to eliminate any possibility of plausible deniability. The first opportunity came on a Friday, 3 weeks after my initial discovery. Matthew had announced he would need to work until 9 p.m. to close an important deal. Penelope had canceled our traditional Friday dinner, claiming an emergency personal training session for a client who was traveling. From the GPS records, I knew exactly where they would be. I arrived at the Riverside Motel at 7:30 p.m., parked in a position with a clear view of the entrance, and waited. At 7:47 p.m., the Honda Civic entered the parking lot. Matthew got out first, looked around nervously, and then walked to the reception. 5 minutes later, Penelope arrived in her red Jeep, parked 3 spaces away from my car, and met Matthew at the door of room 237. What happened next was simultaneously devastating and liberating. Through my phone's zoom lens, I documented every moment of their encounter. Matthew opening the room door for Penelope. The two of them kissing passionately before even closing the door. The room light turning on, and 15 minutes later, the curtains being deliberately closed. I sat in that parking lot for 2 complete hours, documenting every detail. The arrival and departure times, the license plates, the room number, even the casual way they said goodbye in the parking lot, as if it were the most natural meeting in the world. But what really sealed their fate was what happened when Matthew came home that night. At 9:15 p.m., he walked through the front door with the same expression he always had after difficult days at work. "How was your day, honey?" I asked, continuing to watch Netflix as if nothing had happened. "Exhausting," he replied, loosening his tie. "I closed a big deal, but it was a very long negotiation. Barely had time for dinner." While he spoke, I could smell Penelope's perfume still on his jacket. I could see a pink lipstick mark on his shirt collar, a shade I never wore. And when he kissed me quickly before going upstairs to shower, the taste on his lips was unmistakably someone else's. That night, after Matthew fell asleep, I transferred all the photos and documents to my secret email account. For the next 3 weeks, I refined my evidence collection to an almost scientific level. I didn't just document the meetings, I researched patterns, identified frequency, even discovered they had a special song that Matthew played on Spotify every time he left to meet her. But documenting the betrayal was only half the equation. The other half was preparing myself legally and financially for the inevitable divorce. And that's where their underestimation became my greatest advantage. In the second week of my investigation, I scheduled a consultation with Adrian Cook, widely considered Seattle's best divorce attorney. Adrian had a reputation for being meticulous, aggressive when necessary, and absolutely relentless in protecting his clients' interests. When I explained my situation and showed the preliminary evidence I had collected, his eyes literally lit up. "Mrs. Thompson," he said, In 20 years of practice, I rarely see a case with such detailed documentation. If you continue collecting evidence at this level for the next few weeks, we will not only ensure a favorable divorce, but we can also pursue compensation for alienation of affection and emotional distress. Adrian explained that Washington is a no-fault divorce state, which means that infidelity itself doesn't technically affect property division. But evidence of marital dissipation, spending marital money on affairs, and detailed documentation of deliberate deception could significantly influence the judge's decisions about alimony and property division. More importantly, Adrian helped me understand how to protect my assets before the official divorce. As a senior digital marketing manager, I earned approximately $15,000 more per year than Matthew. Our house was in my name because my credit score was significantly better when we bought it, but we had joint bank accounts and investments that needed to be strategically protected. Over the next 2 weeks, meticulously following Adrian's advice, I began reorganizing our financial structure in completely legal but strategic ways. I transferred my 401k contributions to an individual account. I opened a new bank account where I deposited my salary, keeping only what was necessary in the joint account to avoid raising suspicions. I documented every penny Matthew spent on the affair, the motel rooms, romantic dinners, even gifts he apparently bought for Penelope. Most revealing was discovering that Matthew had spent almost $8,000 in just 2 months financing the affair. Expensive dinners at restaurants we never went to together. Jewelry that definitely wasn't for me. Even a weekend at a Vancouver resort that he claimed was a sales conference. Every transaction was documented in our joint bank statements, and each became one more piece of evidence of marital dissipation. But perhaps the most shocking discovery came when I decided to hire Miles Morgan, a private investigator recommended by Adrian. Miles was a former police officer specializing in infidelity cases, and in just 1 week he brought information that left me genuinely impressed with Matthew and Penelope's audacity. "Mrs. Thompson," Miles said during our confidential meeting, "your husband and Miss Lee aren't just having an affair. They're actively planning a future together, and this planning specifically includes how to maximize what they can take from you in the divorce." Miles had managed to record a conversation between Matthew and Penelope in her gym's parking lot. In the recording, they openly discussed how Matthew could claim emotional abandonment in the divorce due to my work obsession. Penelope had even suggested that Matthew document cases where I prioritized work over the marriage to strengthen his case. "The irony," Miles continued, "is that while they plan how to manipulate the legal system against you, they're creating evidence of conspiracy to commit fraud that could result in criminal penalties beyond civil ones." Hearing that recording was the moment my sadness completely transformed into cold, calculated determination. Not only were they betraying me, they were actively conspiring to destroy me financially and emotionally. But what they didn't know was that every conspiratorial conversation, every malicious plan, was being documented by professionals who knew exactly how to use this information. During the 5th week of my investigation, I began the final phase of preparation: psychological warfare. If Matthew and Penelope wanted to play mind games, I would give them a masterclass. I started making small comments that planted seeds of paranoia. During a dinner with Penelope, I casually mentioned that some people at work were talking about private investigators that companies are using to check employees. When Matthew came home late one night, I commented that I was thinking about installing security cameras because the neighborhood seemed more dangerous lately. The effect was immediate and entertaining. Matthew started constantly checking if there were strange cars on the street. Penelope became excessively affectionate with me, as if overcompensating for some guilt. Both started asking indirect questions about my day, my plans, if I had noticed anything different lately. But their paranoia also made them careless in new ways. Matthew started deleting messages immediately after sending them, not realizing I had already documented months of evidence. Penelope began inventing increasingly elaborate excuses for our cancellations, creating a web of lies that would be impossible to keep consistent. By the 6th week, I had enough evidence to destroy both of them legally and socially. Photographs, recordings, financial records, GPS documentation, witnesses, conspiracy evidence. It was such a solid case that Adrian told me he had rarely seen anything so comprehensive. But I wanted one more thing before executing my final plan. I wanted them to show exactly how far they would go. I wanted to see if there were any limits to their betrayal, any line they wouldn't cross. I wanted them to completely reveal who they really were before I revealed who I really am. The opportunity came in the 7th week when Matthew announced he wanted to talk about our relationship. I knew, through Miles' recordings, that Penelope had been pressuring Matthew to accelerate the divorce timeline because she had found a perfect apartment for them in Bellevue. When Matthew called me to sit on the living room couch, the same couch where we had spent thousands of nights watching movies together, planning our future, being genuinely happy, I knew the final moment had arrived. "Mila," he began, with an expression I now recognized as his salesman face, "I've been thinking a lot about us, and I think maybe we need some time apart." I let him talk. I let him present his manipulated version of reality, where our marriage had grown apart naturally, and where he had discovered he wanted different things from life. I let him suggest that maybe an amicable divorce would be best for both of us. Throughout his entire performance, I maintained the expression of shock and confusion he expected. I asked the questions a genuinely surprised wife would ask. Is there someone else? Can we try couples therapy? Where did I go wrong? And when he looked me in the eyes and said, "No, there's no one else. I just need to find myself," I knew it was time to show exactly who I had become in the last 45 days. "Matthew," I said calmly, standing up from the couch with a smile he couldn't interpret. "Before we continue this conversation, I think you should know that I've been aware of your affair with Penelope for exactly 45 days. The change in his expression was instantaneous and absolutely satisfying. The color completely drained from Matthew's face, his eyes widened, and for a moment he was completely speechless. It was as if I had just spoken in a foreign language that his brain couldn't process. What are you talking about?" he finally stammered, but I could see the panic already setting in behind his eyes. "I'm talking about the Riverside Motel, room 237. I'm talking about the $8,000 you've spent on restaurants, gifts, and weekend getaways. I'm talking about the 200 text messages per day you've been sending to my best friend for the last 4 months." Matthew's mouth opened and closed like a fish out of water. His hands started trembling slightly, and I watched as every single lie he had carefully constructed began crumbling in real time. "I'm talking about the conversation you had with Penelope in the gym parking lot 3 days ago, where you discussed claiming emotional abandonment in our divorce because of my work schedule. I'm talking about how she suggested you document cases where I prioritized work over marriage." At the mention of the recorded conversation, Matthew actually took a step backward. How could you possibly know about that?" I finished his sentence with a sweet smile. "Matthew, for the last 45 days, while you and Penelope thought you were playing me for a fool, I've been documenting every single moment of your betrayal with the help of Seattle's best divorce attorney and a private investigator who specializes in exactly this type of case." I walked over to the kitchen counter and picked up a thick manila folder I had strategically placed there that morning. "Would you like to see the evidence? I have photographs of you entering and leaving the motel, GPS records showing our car's location every time you claimed to be working late, bank statements highlighting every penny of marital money you spent on your affair, text message screenshots going back 4 months." Matthew's face had gone from pale to completely gray. "Mila, I can explain." "Oh, I'm sure you can," I interrupted, my voice remaining unnaturally calm. "I'm sure you have a whole story prepared about how this is somehow my fault. About how I was emotionally distant, too focused on work, didn't appreciate you enough. Because I heard that conversation too, Matthew. I heard you and Penelope planning to paint me as the neglectful wife who drove you into another woman's arms." I opened the folder and pulled out several photographs, spreading them on the coffee table like a deck of cards. Photos of him and Penelope kissing in the motel parking lot. Photos of them entering room 237 together. Photos of them at restaurants I had never been to, looking at each other the way he used to look at me. The beautiful thing about being underestimated, I continued, is that people become incredibly careless around you. Did you know that Penelope has been telling her gym colleagues about your affair for weeks? She's been bragging about stealing someone's husbands and describing in detail how naive and oblivious I am. This was actually information Miles had gathered through a contact at Penelope's gym, and watching Matthew realize how widely their secret affair was known was delicious. But here's what's really going to shock you, Matthew. This isn't just about catching you cheating. This is about the fact that you and Penelope have been actively conspiring to defraud me in our divorce proceedings. What you plan to claim as emotional abandonment is actually conspiracy to commit fraud, which carries criminal penalties in Washington state. Matthew finally found his voice, though it came out as a whisper. Criminal penalties? That's right. Attempting to manipulate divorce proceedings through false claims and manufactured evidence isn't just unethical, it's illegal. And thanks to your recorded conversations, we have clear evidence of premeditation. I pulled out my phone and opened the voice recording app. In fact, I think we should call Penelope right now and let her know that her secret is out. I'm curious to see how she handles being caught. No, Mila, please don't. Matthew started, but I was already dialing. Penelope answered on the second ring. Hey girl, what's up? Her voice was bright and cheerful, the same fake enthusiasm she'd been using with me for months. Hi Penelope, I'm here with Matthew, and I thought you should know that I've been aware of your affair for 45 days. I have photographic evidence, recorded conversations, and detailed documentation of your conspiracy to defraud me in divorce proceedings. The silence on the other end of the line was deafening. I could practically hear Penelope's world imploding through the phone. Mila, this isn't what you think, she finally managed. Really? Because I think it's exactly what it looks like. I think you've been sleeping with my husband for 4 months while pretending to be my best friend. I think you've been helping him plan to manipulate our divorce proceedings. And I think you've been telling people at your gym about how easy it was to fool the naive little wife. I never said, how could you know about Penelope? I know about everything. I know about the apartment you found in Bellevue. I know about the weekend in Vancouver that Matthew told me was a sales conference. I know about the jewelry he bought you with our joint credit card. I know about every lie, every meeting, every cruel comment you made about me. At this point, I could hear Penelope crying on the other end of the phone. Matthew was sitting on the couch with his head in his hands, looking like he might vomit. Here's what's going to happen, I continued, my voice still maintaining that eerily calm tone. Matthew is going to pack his things and leave this house tonight. You're both going to receive divorce papers and civil lawsuit papers within the week. And you're both going to discover exactly how expensive it is to underestimate someone who spent 45 days preparing for this moment. Mila, please, we can work this out. Matthew tried one last time. I turned to look at him directly, and for the first time since this conversation started, I let some of the anger I'd been feeling for 45 days show in my voice. Work this out? Matthew, you looked me in the eyes every single day for 45 days and lied to me. You kissed me goodnight after spending hours with another woman. You made plans for our future while secretly planning our divorce. You spent our money on another woman, and then came home and told me you loved me. I could see tears starting to form in his eyes, but I felt absolutely nothing for him. But the thing that really sealed your fate wasn't even the cheating, Matthew. It was the conspiracy. It was hearing you two plan to destroy me financially and emotionally. It was listening to you discuss how to manipulate the legal system to take everything from me while painting me as the villain of our story. I walked back to the kitchen counter and picked up another folder. This contains all the documentation my attorney will need to pursue, not just an advantageous divorce settlement, but also alienation of affection claims, intentional infliction of emotional distress, and conspiracy to commit fraud charges. Matthew and Penelope had both gone completely silent. The only sound in the room was Penelope's quiet crying through the phone speaker. "The most beautiful part of all this," I said, enjoying every word, "is that while you two were so busy thinking you were smarter than me, you created a paper trail and digital evidence record that most prosecutors would call a gift. Every text message, every GPS location, every credit card charge, every recorded conversation about your plans to defraud me. It's all admissible evidence." I looked at Matthew one final time. "You asked if we could try couples therapy. Here's your answer. You can't therapize your way out of conspiracy charges. You can't counsel your way out of civil lawsuits. And you definitely can't charm your way out of the fact that I spent 45 days becoming the last person you should have ever tried to deceive." The next few hours were a blur of Matthew frantically packing while making phone calls, probably to lawyers, definitely to Penelope trying to coordinate their stories. But it was too late for damage control. Every move they had made for months had been anticipated and documented. As I watched my husband of 10 years stuff his belongings into garbage bags and suitcases, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. Not just relief that the marriage was over, but relief that I had finally seen who he really was. Relief that I had trusted my instincts and planned carefully instead of reacting emotionally. Relief that the naive, trusting woman they thought they knew had turned out to be their worst nightmare. When Matthew finally carried his last bag to the car, he turned back to me one final time. "Mila, I know you probably can't forgive me, but I want you to know that I did love you." I looked at this man who had shared my bed, my dreams, my life for 10 years, and I realized that I felt absolutely nothing for him anymore. "Matthew," I said quietly, "if you had loved me, you never could have done any of this. But thank you for showing me exactly who you are. It made the last 45 days much easier." 6 months later, I'm sitting in the living room of my house, fully mine now, as the court ruled in my favor on every single asset, and I can honestly say that the woman who discovered those text messages 45 days ago no longer exists. She's been replaced by someone stronger, smarter, and infinitely more aware of her own worth. The legal proceedings unfolded exactly as Adrian had predicted. The combination of evidence for adultery, financial dissipation, and conspiracy to commit fraud created what he called a perfect storm of legal consequences for Matthew and Penelope. The divorce settlement awarded me the house, the majority of our joint assets, and a significant alimony payment based on Matthew's deliberate waste of marital funds. But the civil lawsuits were where the real justice happened. The alienation of affection claim against Penelope resulted in a settlement that effectively bankrupted her personal training business. She had to sell her car, move back in with her parents, and the gym where she worked terminated her contract due to the scandal. Turns out, bragging about stealing someone's husband to your coworkers becomes problematic when those conversations end up as evidence in court. Matthew's situation was even more devastating. The conspiracy charges, while ultimately pleaded down to civil penalties, cost him his job at the dealership. Apparently, having your personal life become local news isn't great for someone whose career depends on trustworthiness and relationship building. The financial penalties from the civil suits, combined with losing his primary income, meant he had to file for bankruptcy within 4 months of our divorce being finalized. The apartment in Bellevue that he and Penelope had planned to share, they couldn't afford it anymore. Last I heard through mutual acquaintances, Matthew was living in a studio apartment and working at a used car lot for a fraction of his previous salary. Penelope moved to Portland to start fresh, but in the age of social media and Google searches, fresh starts aren't as easy as they used to be. But here's what I didn't expect. I don't feel vindictive about their downfall. I don't celebrate their struggles or take pleasure in their misfortune. What I feel is something much more powerful: complete indifference. They've become irrelevant to my life in a way that feels almost surreal. The 45 days I spent investigating them taught me something crucial about myself. I am far more capable, resilient, and strategic than I ever imagined. The skills I had been using to build marketing campaigns for other people's companies turned out to be exactly what I needed to rebuild my own life. 3 months after the divorce was finalized, I received an offer that changed everything. A startup in San Francisco, impressed by the strategic thinking I had demonstrated in a project at my current job, offered me a position as Director of Digital Strategy, with a salary nearly double what I was making in Seattle. The irony wasn't lost on me. Matthew and Penelope's betrayal had freed me to pursue opportunities I never would have considered while trying to maintain our stable life together. I took the job, sold the house in Seattle for a substantial profit, and moved to San Francisco to start completely fresh. For the first time in over a decade, every decision I made was entirely my own. Where to live, how to spend my time, what risks to take with my career. It was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The house I bought in San Francisco is a beautiful Victorian in the Mission District, with original hardwood floors and a view of the bay from the top floor. It's smaller than the house Matthew and I shared, but it's entirely mine in a way that feels profound. Every piece of furniture, every decoration, every plant on the windowsill reflects my actual preferences, rather than compromises made for a relationship. You know what I love about hiring people who've been through major life upheavals? Sarah told me during my 6-month review. They've already proven they can handle anything. Business crises feel manageable when you've survived personal ones. She was right. The confidence I gained from successfully navigating the most devastating betrayal of my life translated into fearlessness in professional situations. I found myself volunteering for challenging projects, speaking up in meetings, taking calculated risks that I never would have attempted before. The woman who had spent 45 days secretly gathering evidence had learned that she was capable of much more than she had ever imagined. Dating wasn't even on my radar for the first 8 months after moving to San Francisco. I was too busy rediscovering who I was without Matthew, too focused on building my new career and social life. But eventually, I started accepting invitations to social events, joining hiking groups, saying yes when colleagues suggested group dinners. When I did finally start dating again, the experience was completely different from anything I had known before. I approached potential relationships with the same strategic thinking I had applied to the divorce, not in a calculated way, but with clear boundaries and honest communication about what I wanted. I had learned the hard way that people will show you who they are if you pay attention, and I was now an expert at paying attention. The man I'm seeing now, James, is a software engineer who appreciates directness and has no patience for games or manipulation. On our third date, I told him the complete story of my divorce, not as a sob story, but as an explanation of why I value honesty and communication above almost everything else. His response was to thank me for trusting him with the story, and to share his own experiences with betrayal in previous relationships. "I love that you're not bitter," he said. "You could have let that experience make you cynical or closed off, but instead you seem more open and confident than anyone I've ever met." He was right about the lack of bitterness. Somewhere during those 45 days of investigation, or maybe during the legal proceedings, or perhaps gradually over the months of building my new life, I had processed the anger and hurt in a way that left me stronger rather than damaged. The most unexpected gift of the whole experience has been my relationship with trust. I thought that being betrayed so completely would make me suspicious and guarded, but the opposite happened. Learning to trust my own instincts, my own intelligence, my own ability to handle whatever life throws at me, made it easier to trust other people appropriately. I'm more discerning now, but not cynical. I listen more carefully, but I'm not paranoid. 6 months ago, I received a friend request on Facebook from Hannah Allen, my sister, who had been living in New York during the worst of the divorce drama. She had sent a message along with the request. "I saw the news articles about your case, and I wanted you to know how proud I am of how you handled everything. You've inspired me to be more assertive in my own life." Reading that message made me realize something important. My story had become bigger than just my personal experience. The way I had handled Matthew and Penelope's betrayal had apparently resonated with people who had faced similar situations. Through mutual friends, I learned that several women in Seattle had used my case as a template for their own divorce proceedings when they discovered infidelity. One woman, whose husband had been cheating with a coworker, hired Adrian Cook specifically because of his work on my case. Another had used Miles Morgan's investigative services after reading about the evidence we had gathered. My strategic approach to a devastating personal situation had somehow become a blueprint for others facing similar betrayals. That realization led to an unexpected opportunity. A literary agent who had read about my case in a legal blog reached out to see if I would be interested in writing a book about the experience. Not a tell-all or revenge fantasy, but a practical guide for people facing infidelity. How to gather evidence, protect assets, make strategic decisions while processing emotional trauma. I'm 3 chapters into writing that book now, and the process has been incredibly therapeutic. Revisiting those 45 days from the perspective of someone who survived and thrived has helped me appreciate just how much I've grown. The woman who found those text messages was strong, but she didn't know it yet. The woman writing this story knows exactly what she's capable of. Looking back, I can honestly say that discovering Matthew's affair was one of the best things that ever happened to me. Not because I'm glad he cheated, the betrayal was genuinely devastating, but because it forced me to discover reserves of strength, intelligence, and resilience that I never knew I possessed. I learned that I could be strategic without being manipulative, strong without being bitter, and independent without being isolated. I learned that the life I thought I wanted, stable, predictable, built around someone else's needs and limitations, was actually keeping me from becoming the person I was meant to be. The most beautiful irony of the whole situation is that Matthew and Penelope's betrayal, which they intended to be the beginning of their new life together, ended up being the beginning of my best life. Their attempt to deceive and manipulate me backfired so completely that it's almost poetic. These days, when people ask me about that period of my life, I tell them that I spent 45 days learning exactly who I was dealing with. And in the process, I discovered exactly who I am. That discovery was worth every moment of pain, every hour of investigation, every day of pretending I didn't know what I knew. Because now I know, with absolute certainty, that I can handle anything. And that knowledge is the most valuable thing Matthew and Penelope ever gave me, even though they never intended to give it at all. The woman who smiled calmly when her husband asked for a divorce knew exactly what she was doing. She had spent 45 days preparing for that moment, and she was ready. More than ready, she was unstoppable. And that, more than any revenge or legal victory, is the real ending to this story. Not the destruction of the people who betrayed me, but the construction of a life so much better than anything I had before that their betrayal feels like the favor they never meant to do me. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. But the best outcome of all is discovering that you're capable of living better than you ever imagined possible.